Stand up, single file, facing your front, ready for learning. Thank you. What are we doing today, sir? We're listening to Mr. Hopkins Burke and the Saturday Lunch.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Live from Nottingham, this is the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hey, we duck. It's Saturday, it's 1 p.m, and this is the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke. In the next 90 minutes, we'll be talking about the history of learning disability, pupil premium funding, and Oak National Academy. This is your show, so give me your views. Listen on Podbean or call in and win a Teachers Talk Radio mug. Tune in, talk it out live on Podbean. This is Teachers Talk Radio.
Live from Nottingham, this is the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
We are live and we are ready to go. Welcome to the Saturday Lunch on Teachers Talk Radio. My name is Tom Hopkins Burke, and over the course of the next 90 minutes, we'll be talking to some top quality guests and discussing some of the biggest stories in education. Last week, I hosted an RE special focusing on the Ofsted Research Review into RE education across the country. I was joined by Susanna Strong, Nick McGee, Adam Smith, and we also had calls in from Dawn Cox and Wakarak Mehdi. We spoke about the purpose of RE, how to raise its value in schools, the RE curriculum as a progression model, and the role of worldviews in an RE curriculum. On today's show, I'm joined by Ben Newmark and Sean Webster, MBE, to discuss Ben's inquiry on the history of people with learning disabilities. I'll also be talking about the pupil premium funding scandal and how schools are missing out on millions of pounds because of a change by the government. We'll also discuss Oak National Academy. How has it helped you during the pandemic and what should happen to it after the pandemic? You can share your thoughts on the show live using the Podbean app. The Saturday Lunch is live every Saturday between 1 and 2:30 p.m. and you can text in your views or call in to make your voice heard by clicking on one of the call-in icons. We are also live streaming this show on Twitter, on Facebook and on YouTube. So if you are listening via Twitter, Facebook or YouTube, and in particular on Facebook, we have closed captioning. Then a very good afternoon to you. And of course, if you're listening back via our website, ttradio.org/listen back, via Podbean, via Spotify, or via Apple Podcasts, then a warm welcome to you today. If you want to interact directly with myself and with our special guests, Ben Newmark and Sean Webster, then download the Podbean app, subscribe to Teachers Talk Radio, and get calling in and texting in. You can also tweet us at TT Radio 2021 with your thoughts on the show, both live and afterwards. And as I am the main Twitter admin, I look forward to reading your comments, and of course, any constructive criticism or suggestions for improvement are totally welcome. We have a special prize for the best caller today. Do keep on listening until the very end, when I'll be handing out a very special Teachers Talk Radio mug. Everyone who calls in today to share their views, ask questions to our guests, or just to say hello will have a chance to win this mug, and I will be awarding it at the end of the show. So press that call in icon or the phone down the bottom of your screen, bring your headphones, and we will talk it out. Today, I am going to run a little quiz for all those listening. If you can call in and give me the right answer, you will win a Teachers Talk Radio mug. The question is, there are 8.2 million state school pupils in England. What proportion of these are eligible for free school meals? Is it A, 5%, B, 10%, C, 20%, or D, 30%? Have a little bit of thinking time. What do you think? Is it A, 5%, B, 10%, C, 20%, or D, 30%? We have a caller coming in who I don't recognise. He can't join right now, but he might join in later. So a bit of thinking time. The competition is running until the end of the show. You have until 2:30 p.m. to call in and give me the correct answer. In the meantime, though, I've got Ben Newmark who has called in and I've got on mute ready to talk. Sean, if you're listening as well, then do please call in. I missed you the first time because Ben was calling in at the same time, but please do call in and I'll bring you in as well. No need to panic. I'm going to play the latest education news read by, our emergency weekend newsreader, some guy called Tom Hopkins Burke. Let's see if he's up to a challenge. And of course, you can share your views on the news by texting in.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Tom Hopkins Burke.
This is Tom Hopkins Burke with your weekend Teachers Talk Radio News. A Schools Week investigation has claimed that founding employees of Oak National Academy were in line to receive £41 million under their preferred proposal for the future of the online school. The proposal would have given Oak bosses 80% of shares into a private company before it was withdrawn, having been deemed unworkable. The document, Oak 3.0 Proposal, was submitted to the Reach Foundation, which runs Oak, by Oak's principal Matthew Hood OBE. In response to Schools Week's story, Hood tweeted that he insisted that every option that included employee ownership models explicitly excluded himself from them. The National Association of Head Teachers says that more school bubbles are self-isolating amid concerns over a new variant of COVID. Paul Whiteman, General Secretary of the NAHT, said that the union was picking up more reports of schools having to close multiple classes. Earlier this week, the government announced that 4,000 pupils missed school last Thursday, having tested positive for COVID-19. Furthermore, the number of students self-isolating following potential close contact with a positive case jumped from 65,000 on the 12th of May to 88,000 on the 20th of May. A petition calling for a teacher to be reinstated following his suspension for allegedly raising health and safety concerns has reached almost 1,000 signatures. Tom Mitchell, a teacher at Taverham High School in East Anglia, was suspended earlier this month following 16 years at the school. In November 2020, he was reported to have raised concerns to the school and his union about COVID health and safety measures not being followed, including ventilation and safety within bubbles. A spokesperson from the school said that the school had followed all public health guidance. That was your weekend education news with Tom Hopkins Burke. Some interesting news stories there. Sean, I didn't see you the second time. Do you want to try again, please? I'm sure it's all absolutely fine, but just call in and I'll see you come up and I'll bring you in. We'll be discussing Oak National Academy later in the show. We did ask Nat Hood whether he was able to come onto the show, but he didn't get back to us, which is fair enough. There wasn't much notice, but I will be telling you exactly what he's had to say about that Schools Week article in full. If anybody from Oak is out there listening live, do call in when we get to that segment, because there is definitely plenty to discuss. Do also text in about whether you have seen a pickup in positive cases in your school setting. Also, as teachers, have you got a cold now that masks no longer need to be worn in the classroom? I know I have. Maybe we need to keep masks for good. On Thursday, the 15th of April, 2021, Ben Newmark tweeted the following: "What is teacher radio? Everyone seems to be going on it, but I have no idea what it is." Are you there?
I'm here, yeah.
And you are on Teachers Talk Radio. So hopefully by the end of today's show, you know what it is. I'm not entirely convinced Ben listened to my show on the 17th of April, where I invited him on to talk about his inquiry into the history of learning disability. But we are here now, and we have another treat because Sean Webster, MBE, who has recorded some of the resources for Ben's inquiry, is also going to join us on the show today. I can also see a number of, also Ben, I'm not sure if you've got any headphones because I can hear a little bit of echo in the background, which might be because of that. I also have Carly Waterman in the studio, who I know is principal at Lodge Park Academy because I've had her on the show before. I've got Graham Collum in the studio as well, who was on just before me today. So a big welcome to all of our live listeners in Podbean. And of course, if you're listening on Facebook, on Twitter, or on YouTube, then come and join the Podbean studio and interact with myself, with Ben, and with Sean. Ben, I'm going to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself in a moment. I'm going to introduce Sean because he's not quite called in yet. Sean Webster, MBE, is an author and a human rights campaigner and was awarded an MBE in 2015 for services to people with learning disabilities and their families. At the moment, and thanks to Ben for flagging this up, Sean is starting a campaign on making the labelling and instructions for medicine packaging more accessible. And I will be asking Sean later in the show about how we can support this. Ben, welcome to the show. Could you just briefly introduce yourself to the listeners, please?
Yeah, of course. My name's Ben Newmark, and I'm a history teacher and have been for about 20 years now. I'm also vice principal of Lodge Park Academy, where Carly is the principal. So I know Carly's in on the call. So hello, Carly. And I also am lucky enough to be the father of two daughters, one of which, the eldest, has the wonderful genetic condition Williams syndrome, which, along with lots and lots of wonderful gifts, also brings learning disabilities. And that was first what got me thinking about this project, which I'm here to talk about today.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Ben. So if I could start with my first question, then, how do we define a learning disability, and what separates learning disabilities from other disabilities, like, for example, physical disabilities?
That's a really, really interesting question. And actually, there is considerable controversy around this. There are people who will disagree with what I'm going to say now. But what I'm going to go with is how I believe MenCap tends to define it, which is a learning disability is different to a difficulty, because a difficulty is something specific that certain strategies or certain techniques can be used to make learning accessible for that person. It almost as if that can kind of be overcome. So we're talking something like dyslexia. There are strategies that can be used to help people to read. A learning disability tends to be more general, which means that there is nothing wrong with the person who has the learning disability. Of course there isn't. But this isn't one specific issue that can be fixed. It's part of who they are, not all of who they are, of course, because there are a huge range of characteristics which make us human, but an inherent part of that person.
Thank you, Ben. I'm bringing in Sean at the moment as well. So I think Sean is now live with us. Sean, can we hear you?
Yes, I'm here.
And I can hear you loud, and I can hear a lot of me echoing in the background. So I'm not sure if either of you need headphones.
I've got headphones, my earphones.
Okay, brilliant. It might be in Ben's. I'm just going to have a quick check. No, I think I can hear myself fine now. That's good. So, yeah, Sean, just very briefly, if you could introduce yourself to our listeners, please.
My name is Sean Webster. I got learning disability. I'm married. I got 5 kids in Philippines and 3 kids in England. I've been working most of my life. I got 2 jobs. One at St. Mary's Hospital and one at Change, and I do freelance work for photo symbols, and I'm campaigning a moment to make labels bigger on medication bottles and tablets because it's very important, and I'll be working with Ben on the book about history of people with learning disabilities.
Thanks very much, Sean. Really good introduction. So if I can go back to Ben, you've already hinted at why you decided to create this project. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that, and also tell us what is Williams syndrome as well?
I'll start with what Williams syndrome is. It's a tiny genetic deletion. We've all got DNA, and the Williams syndrome is caused by a really tiny deletion, which causes lots of specific characteristics, and also, as we said, learning disabilities. It also comes with some incredible gifts and some really kind of cool, mysterious stuff that gets educational and psychologists really interested. I'm talking here about things like musicality and a real interest in the social aspects of life. So that's what Williams syndrome is. It is fascinating. I do encourage anybody listening to Google it, which is the first thing we did after we found out Bessie's diagnosis. In terms of the project and where we started with that, well, just before I came on the show, actually, I was thinking about a Florence Nightingale quote, and Florence Nightingale said, never miss the opportunity to make a practical beginning, no matter how small. And what she meant by that was when things turn into kind of interesting and inspiring projects, they never start out that way. You start off with one small thing, and one thing happens and turns into another. And that's exactly what happened with this project. To begin with, it was just my curiosity as a father, and the fact that I was a history teacher, that led me to notice that in all of the history that I'd learned through many, many years and taught, I'd never, ever come across the history of anybody with learning disability in the entire school curriculum or in any of the books I'd read. So I was curious as a father about this too, because I was curious about my daughter, if she'd lived in different time periods, what could she have expected? What would her life have been like? And so I began researching it and reading, and I found out that it was my own kind of ignorance and myopia for why I hadn't found things about people with learning disability in history, because it exists. I know that's something that Sean will want to talk about later. Sean definitely feels there's been a kind of whitewashing of people with learning disability out of history, which is Sean's phrase. But then I started researching it, and then because I'm used to writing booklets and planning curriculums, the way to kind of organising it in my own mind felt, well, maybe I'll put this into a booklet then, and maybe this could be a way of organising it, and that's where it started. And yes, go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thanks, Ben. I just want to bring in Sean on that point which you raised about the whitewashing of people with learning disabilities from history. Could you just tell us a bit more about that, please, Sean?
I do feel like I've been to history lessons before a long time ago when I was a kid, and I heard anything about people with learning disability in the past. And it got me worried about that, because a lot of people with learning disability, a lot of interesting history, but nobody know about it. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Can you hear me?
And but nobody know about the interesting history people with learning disability got.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Sean. And certainly, I can hear a big echo in my thing, so I'm just going to see what. Oh no, that's fine. Brilliant. Oh no, it's not. It's okay. I think I've got it, Val. Bring you back in, Sean. I've just muted you, so I'll bring you back in a second. My next question then is really about your choice of inquiry question, Ben, and how you decided on an inquiry question for this sequence. And your choice was disabled. How have people with learning disabilities been seen in societies in which they lived? What sort of, because we're both history teachers, what sort of thinking went into that choice of question?
Quite a lot of thinking. I mean, the first reason for the question mark at the end of disabled is influenced by the social model of disability. The idea that actually disability is not something that exists solely within the person. It's also about the way that society deals with that person. And so that question mark was very deliberate. The best way to frame the inquiry seemed to me to be around inclusion and exclusion and a change of continuity theme, because through different periods you do see people being included and then excluded in different ways. And when I first started doing my reading on this and planning the inquiry, I think I felt quite naively that actually we'd look at a sort of upward trajectory with people being excluded in the past. And as we have advanced, it's a terrible word, I don't mean that, and I use it deliberately with scare quotation marks around it, things were becoming more inclusive. And I was was interested and surprised to see that that wasn't true. And it seemed to be the most logical way to structure it. So that's where I came to it. The one other thing I would say that's interesting about the title is that originally the title I'd had was how were people with learning disability treated by the societies they live in? But I got some really strong feedback on that and said to try and avoid the word treated because of its medical connotations. Because too often learning disability has been medicalized in the past. It's not a medical condition. People with learning disability, there's nothing wrong with them. They're not ill. And so I changed that word to treated because I felt that kind of reinforced those unhelpful impressions.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, no, I'm looking at being seen, definitely. And I think I think it offers two windows. I think it offers a window into the experiences of people with learning disabilities, but it also offers a window into the attitudes within those societies in which people with learning disabilities have lived. Julie Cordner has messaged in to say, hello, I've just seen your lovely message about my People Premium blog. Looking forward to hearing your coverage. Yes, that will be on for about, 10 to. But yeah, do please keep on listening, and also do call in, Julie, and talk to us about that as well. But no, I've been looking at being seen, and I'm thinking, yes, it's fantastic because we can learn about people with learning disabilities, but also we can learn about the attitudes of those people in society, in those societies as well. So my next question, I suppose, Ben, is how can the experiences of people with learning disabilities offer a window into the societies in which they lived?
I think if it's all right, I'd like to hand that question over to Sean. I think he's much better qualified to talk
Brilliant.
about that.
No problem. We'll hand it over to Sean once I've just quickly unmuted him. Let's go. Sean, whenever you're ready, how do you think the experiences of people with learning disabilities could offer a window into the societies in which they lived?
I've got people like myself got a lot of life experience. We can help them to understand us a lot better. We got a lot of interesting history about ourselves already. If we can teach them about us, we can change their attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Thank you.
Like people with learning disability now, we got a lot of history, and we can tell them who we are about. Like myself, I got history, good and bad, and I feel like I can tell people about that. But not just me. I know a lot of people like myself would love to talk to people and change their attitudes about, talk about old personal history.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sean. I think that's really... I can hear a lot of echo in mine, so I'm just going to try to check something. That's really interesting. Thank you, Sean. My next question really is about how... I can hear a lot of echo. One moment, Sean. I've just taken you off, Sean, and then I would like you to call back in again once you're able to, because I could just hear quite a bit of echo, which I think was coming from you. But no, definitely, please do call back in again, Sean, and we'll sort that. The experience of people with learning disabilities offer a really interesting window then into the societies in which they lived, and it offers that multi-perspectivity, I suppose. Thinking back to the researching of a project, Ben, of the people whose stories you researched, investigated and wrote about, is there a particular story, is there a particular person or group of people whose stories resonated the most with you, and why?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think the first thing to say was that I was very, very conscious that I was constantly trying to find examples of the voice of people with learning disability, which is difficult to find in the past because, as we know of any kind of group that's been marginalised and excluded, it's difficult to find those voices. But the historian Simon Jarrett was enormously helpful in me finding stories and records written about, and as much as we can, with the words of people with learning disability in them. And yeah, I do have a favourite story, actually. I think my favourite story is Thomas Baggett's story, who lived in the 18th century. And Thomas Baggett was employed as a skin gatherer in a London market. He had a learning disability, or we believe he did, and he'd been involved in a riot. He'd had a few drinks and got himself involved in a riot. And what was really interesting was that we have the court transcript of his appearance at court. And what's clear is that Thomas found himself having scores and scores of people, 5 or 6 people, standing up and claiming that he was with them at the time of the riots, and actually giving contradictory statements. So effectively saying that he was with me, and someone else would then stand up and say he was with me as well. One moving account is the judge actually instructing a young lady, be very careful now, don't perjure yourself, you get yourself in trouble as well. And she replies, looks straight at him, I always picture, and replies, I am being very careful, I don't really care what other people have said, I know that Thomas was with me. And what I thought was interesting about this was that it was the sense of inclusion, that actually Thomas must have had enough of an effect on the people around him for them to want to protect him, which is what they've done. They protected Thomas, and the judge and the jury were quite happy to go along with the stories, and actually acquitted him completely. It's a funny story if you read it, but I think the important thing here is about Thomas's agency. You know, it's really clear that Thomas must have had an impact on the world that led people to wanting to protect him in this way. Also, interestingly, with the Thomas story, is the fact that that he had been included within that society, but also you'll see that the account does not romanticize his life either. It also accepts that Thomas did have a tough time and often was teased and bullied, but when things were at their hardest and when Tom's life was at stake, he was protected by the people around him, which I think is rather wonderful.
But yeah, thinking about that then, is there a danger of over-romanticising the history of people with learning disabilities, do you think? And how have you sort of tried to avoid that in places where that's come as an issue?
I'd have to think about that. I mean, I think absolutely there is a danger in over-romanticising. And I think one of the things about history in general is that as soon as you try and introduce a kind of meta-narrative to it, if you're trying to tell a story with an ulterior motive already in mind, you're going to run into problems because life doesn't fit neatly into patterns. And I think history certainly doesn't. So I don't think I was ever conscious of trying to make sure that I hadn't romanticised. But what I was really careful about was trying to make sure that as far as possible I was telling the truth as far as I could tell it from the sources, and that led to some really affectionate and warm and interesting stories, and also, of course, as the inquiry progresses, some really horrific ones as well. I wouldn't say that I was setting out to make sure that it was balanced, just to try and tell the truth of what I could get from the scholarship and the voices of the people with learning disability themselves.
That's definitely a very noble aim. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, and certainly as history teachers, we find ourselves in this interesting position because, as you know, the past is, not infinite, but vast. And we have to be selective with material that we choose to include in our lessons and within our wider curriculum. Did you find yourself in a similar position when you were creating this? Did you have any struggles in choosing what to include and what you had to omit?
Yeah, I did, and I think the other thing is that I'm nothing so grand as a historian. I would never describe myself as that. And so what I was also aware of is that you've got a limited amount of time, and this isn't a self-indulgent project. Once you decided that it was actually we decided it was going to be children to learn in school. It couldn't be that long. So of course there were stories that had to be excluded and things that had to be cut out, and I actually went through a long sequence of drafts with this thing as well, and was constantly bouncing it out to many history teachers who I won't mention them because I'm bound to miss out the ones who have helped most if I try and say them all, but many history teachers who are active on Twitter gave me advice with this and helped me try and make sure that I wasn't going down a rabbit hole and becoming self-indulgent. And then of course I sent it to but actually I should say, before I even decided to turn this into a proper book, like when I was just working on it, one of the first people I spoke to about this was Sean, because I wanted to check that what I was doing was honouring the people with learning disability who'd lived in the past and was respectful and would be approved of. And I think it's a good opportunity to bring Sean back in, and he could then pick up for what happened next.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to bring Sean back in. I'm going to unmute him in a second and just say sort of how did you get involved in this project at the start? How did you get into contact with Ben about this? And what were your initial thoughts?
Hello?
Hello, I can hear you.
I felt very proud to be a part of it because when Ben asked me to join his work about history of people with learning disabilities in his book, because I feel like at the moment not much people know about it, and I feel I wanted to make that happen. Because the moment when I said what Ben said earlier on, and what I said, it was whitewashed. And that needs to be changed, because we could, and no, Ben, because I worked before with a lady called Stabber on a book about my life experience.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Sean. And my next question then, I suppose, is what were your initial impressions of the project in terms of how accessible it was, and what suggestions did you have to Ben?
Because Ben asked me about the wording, and because I got over 20 years of making information accessible, I could tell me what was not accessible and what was accessible. And Ben listened to me, and I thought, but when I was working with Ben to make sure the book was accessible, I thought he could. Because I wanted to make sure with Ben the book was accessible for people with learning disabilities and everybody else to make sure they can read it and understand it.
Brilliant, thanks, Sean. And one final question before I go back to Ben. Do you think that having these resources available to you when you were yourself in school would have made any difference at all in terms of how you perceived yourself, both as a child and when entering adulthood? And if so, how?
If I had the book, what me and Ben worked on the history, yes, the book will make a big difference for me. I will understand about the past, about myself a lot better. I'll be more confident about myself, knowing about the history of people with learning disability. Because I think it'd be a big opportunity for all schools to get Ben books in history lessons, because if people with learning disabilities learn, not just kids with learning disability, and kids without learning disabilities learn about history, it will be a big difference. It will change attitudes about people with learning disability overnight.
Thanks for that, Sean. If I can go back to Ben then. When you fantastic, we've got a surprise caller. Let's see who we've got here. I wonder who we've got here. Hello, I believe we have Noreen on the line. Hi, Noreen.
Hi everyone. Hello, Ben. Hi.
Did you have something you wanted to say, Noreen?
Yes, please. I just wanted to call in to say to Ben, I love what he's doing. The value of what he does is obviously inclusion, but more generally, it's making everybody who has a disability feel like they are just as valuable part of society as anybody else. That I think that is the real value of everything which Ben does, and I'm in so much awe of Ben that, if he was here, I'd hug him.
Ben, anything you want to say to Noreen?
It's always a pleasure to have Noreen, and thank you so much. I mean, the only thing that I would emphasise is that this has turned into, I'll talk a bit more about that later, but it's such a collective group endeavour. The reason I think it's caught people's imaginations is because it isn't just me doing it. It's because of people like Sean and others who have been working on the audio podcast as well. But thank you, Noreen.
Yeah, no, I'd like to say thank you to Sean and actually get Ben to send my thanks to everybody who has helped him. Like you said, it is a team effort. It did need Ben to start it off, but everybody who's joined in, like Sean, have made it what it is. And it's really, really valuable resource, which I'm sure schools in general, and pupils in particular will find really useful. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Noreen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Noreen. Fantastic that we just had Noreen Khalid there, who is our host of the Wednesday Late Show every other week on Teachers Talk Radio at 8 p.m. Ben, we obviously, Noreen, very complimentary about your work, but generally speaking, what has been the reaction to your work, and did you imagine the reception that you got for it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been blown away by the reception. But I just wanted to pick up on one other thing that I was laughing when Sean said, because Sean is always so polite, but I couldn't help laughing when we were talking. You asking Sean about my inquiries about making it accessible. The first thing he said very bluntly to me was, "I like the idea that it is not accessible," and that kind of was the jump off to doing. First of all, the more accessible version, which has got Sean's work all over it. And then secondly, moving into the audio version of it, Sean and I decided that what would be really great was if we could record a version of it for people who struggle with literacy, so that people with learning disability who were not able to read as well as perhaps some other people would be able to hear the whole thing. And then we also decided that it would be only right if that was read by people with learning disability too, and they would have some input in changing scripts and having some input, which we did do. We also decided that it would be wrong to ask people to do this for free. I strongly feel that people with learning disability already do far too much volunteering. And so the first sign that this was catching people's imaginations is I kind of just started a GoFundMe on Twitter and asked if people would be willing to donate money so that we could pay the people who are all involved with this. And remarkably, we raised over £1,000 in just about 4 days, which was much quicker than I was expected. Also caught me on the hop a little bit, because I was thinking, well, I'm actually going to have to do this thing now, aren't I? And so then we found more than 10 people, I believe, who were willing to read parts of the booklet and record it all together. And the response to that was really, really positive. And so that is almost finished now. We're just waiting for one more recording to come in, and then we're going to have it professionally produced, and we will have this third version of the booklet as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Carly's still in the studio, which links in quite nicely. One moment. It links in very nicely to my next question, which is about how the resources have been used so far at Lodge Park Academy, where yourself and Carly both work. Carly, you are live on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hi, morning.
Good afternoon. Yes, fantastic. I know that you've worked very closely with Ben on this, as anybody can tell if you look at your Twitter accounts. How have these resources been received and been used at Lodge Park?
Well, I was really keen to make it part of our PSHE, and that's because I don't know if this has been part of the sort of the thinking when Ben and Sean and the team had been creating it. But for me, it felt like it was a really good way to unlock thinking about diversity and inclusion anyway, which is something that obviously all schools and all school leaders are thinking about all the time. You know, and I think we'd thought very carefully about how we had adapted our PSHE curriculum in the light of the pandemic. And we knew that we needed to talk to our young people about inclusion and going beyond mere tolerance and being much more welcoming of everybody in our community. But when we have those conversations, to be honest, we rarely talk about people with learning disabilities. You know, we're quick to talk about race and ethnicity and religion and LGBTQ and all of those things, which are obviously really important as well. And it just really struck me that actually we're really keen to be inclusive, and yet there's this group in society that we continue to ignore, not deliberately, but that's just something that happens. And I thought it's so important that what we do is give our young people access to this inquiry, to this scheme of work, perhaps not through history curriculum, which is packed with other stuff, but maybe in PSHE it would work really well. And actually it has worked really well. So we've spent this whole half term, once a week in our PSHE curriculum, delivering this scheme of work. And the feedback's been fantastic. And I think one of the things that Ben and I have both found is that the young people in our school who or who have family members who have a learning disability now feel seen. And that's really important to us, because perhaps before they felt quite marginalised but had never said anything. So for us, it's been received really well by our teachers. We've also been able to, talk to each other about how we deliver it, how we continue to make it more accessible. And I'm really proud of what we've done in the school. So, Ben knows how I feel about it. I feel like it's a fantastic scheme of work that, like I said, has unlocked further conversations about equality and diversity. And I really highly recommend that schools either build it into their PSHE or citizenship or history curriculums if they can do. I mean, there's no reason why it can't be adapted to meet people's different needs. But it's certainly, it's scholarly, it's interesting, it's accessible, it's everything that you need. And the conversations that our young people have had as a result of it have just been quite humbling. And that's, that's really been what it's all about.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Carly. Ben, is there anything you want to add to that about how the resources have been used so far at Lodge Park?
Yeah, I mean, Carly has covered everything, I think, at Lodge Park. It has been really interesting to see the reaction of staff and pupils to it. I also know it's being used in a range of other schools now as well. It's kind of caught people's imaginations, which again has been really, really encouraging. I mean, I've got to be honest and say, when I first started the project, I did think that this project was going to be largely a personal one, because people with learning disabilities are marginalised and excluded. We can't get around that. They are. And I didn't think there would be as much interest as there was. And to see the interest picking up has been really, really heartening, and it's actually made me positive about humanity, which I try to be, and given me hope that actually it is possible to do better than we are. I think the other thing that I would say about the way the resources have been used and continue to be used is I was aware right from the start that I didn't want to be too precious about this. I knew that curriculums are packed, as Carly said, in history curriculums, and well, name me an area which isn't packed. And so I want to be very deliberate with the teacher guide I produced, that there were many different ways that you could use this if you wanted to, that you could use it in PSHE, or you could detach some of the lessons and teach them in an existing history curriculum so that they take place at the time in which they're being taught, rather than just being all in one unit at one time. The only thing I really still insist on when people ring me about it, which they do sometimes, is just please don't teach it as part of the history of medicine, which I know many schools do, because it is not a medical issue. There is nothing wrong with my daughter. There is nothing wrong with Sean. And this kind of lazy maybe is a bit unfair because it comes from old attitudes, but putting this in as if it's a medical condition is one of the most unhelpful ways of framing this subject, I think.
No, thanks very much for that, Ben. And yeah, definitely a point which I was going to raise as well. Definitely, given everything that you've said so far, it's not something which can be slotted in or bolted on to any medicine free time thing. As a thematic unit, perhaps in preparation for a thematic study at GCSE, I think, I don't know what you'd say, Ben, but I think it's perhaps very useful practice for that. But yes, I think you've answered quite a few of my other questions in that little bit there. My next question, and I suppose I'm going to start with, we've got somebody listening in from Vietnam. If you would like to call in, then please do. I want to go back to Sean, though, and I want to ask how you would advise teachers to make their own resources more accessible for people with learning disabilities. I want to hear from Sean on that first, and I'm going to go to Ben. Going to see if I can hear Sean first. One moment.
Sean, you're muted, Sean. So I think if you're talking, you just need to turn off your mute button.
Sean, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, brilliant.
Can you repeat that question again, please?
Yeah, of course. Just give me a second, please. So how would you advise teachers to make their own resources more accessible for people with learning disabilities?
What they need to do, we can train teachers around making information like issues like font size, like the sizes of letters, make sure where you are making your information accessible, you put the key words in bold, because the best people you work with are people like myself, Ben, I got a learning disabilities, and I train people, one of the resources accessible for using font size, user audio like bandana, using 1.5 gaps, and we use maybe using pictures next to the sentences to make it easier for children with learning disabilities to understand.
Thank you, Sean. I'm not sure if you finished, Bear.
No, I'm not finished.
Go on.
Because what the best thing teacher can do is make sure they always check with us if the information is accessible from top to bottom, and we can understand it. If we can understand it, we can be honest with them and make sure they can make it easy to understand.
Brilliant, thanks, Sean. And Ben, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Not at all. Sean's the expert on this, and I think he's covered everything. I've got nothing to add.
Fantastic, thank you. Going back to Sean.
One more thing. With speaking too, they've got to make sure they speak plain English.
Speaking plain English.
They're not jargon. Another thing the teacher's got to cover: the writing and the speaking in plain English, jargon free.
Fantastic, thanks, Sean. And Sean, do you have any suggestions for how we can make Teachers Talk Radio more accessible?
Well, make sure if you're speaking, don't speak fast. Make sure you just speak plain English. And if you don't understand a person with learning disability, be honest and let us know. I know it, and not the way you're doing your sentences. Make sure it's very clear to us to understand it, and when we can listen to it.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Sean. Going back to Ben, what are the plans for the future with this? And also, because a lot of schools don't have a Twitter presence, how are you going to maximise the reach of this project into as many schools as possible in the country?
Thank you. Well, the next part of the project is to get this audio version, this sort of podcast done, and we're almost there now. That will be the next thing. And then once that's finished, Sean has already been working loads on this, and Sean is really keen to create part of the website that we've got. There's a website for anyone listening as well, by the way, called learningdisabilityhistory.org. And we want to try and find as much source material and the voices of people with learning disability themselves to be hosted on that website. That we found quite a lot of well, no, we haven't. Sean has found a lot of documentary films that we want to put up there so that it becomes a kind of archive. What we were realizing was that we're kind of stumbling over this stuff. There is no central portal we're aware of about the history of people with learning disability, which anyone could go to and quickly and easily find those things. So that will be the next thing. We're not quite sure what we're going to do with that yet, but it's a bit like the Florence Nightingale quote again. We'll start it and we'll see where we go and what it develops into. Would say as well at this point that this is very, very difficult, really great, but also quite challenging work for anybody. And also difficult for Sean, because many of the things that he'll be looking at and that he has been looking at are not nice. When you're looking at the history of people with learning disability, especially in the 50s and 60s and 40s, really isn't pleasant. So Sean is really doing some really hard work looking through that and finding that.
It'd be tough, because when I was listening to it and watching it, if I were living in time, I will never have a chance to be married, to have a job, have kids, or any jobs. It'd be like being in a jail. When I watched it, oh God, it was moving with the things they were saying about people like us who got learning disability, using horrible words like handicap, retards. But I'm very passionate to make people to I'm very passionate when I'm working with Ben to see them documents, because people need to know about the history of people with learning disabilities.
Thanks, Sean. And finally, before you leave us, Sean, one moment. So before you leave us, Sean, how can we support your campaign to make the labelling and instructions for medicine packaging more accessible?
What I'm doing at the moment is I work for St Mary's Hospital in Leeds, and I've been doing undercover mystery shopping. I've been talking to chemists around where I live in Waltham, and what they need to do, the chemists, they need to work with us at NHS to make sure the labels is bigger. The information about how much medication you take needs to be a lot bigger for people to see learning disability or not. At the moment, the labels are too small, the writing is too small and not accessible. They need to work with us and design a lot bigger labels, and the information about how much medication you take is going to be in easy read, 16 font size, and bold, and they can see it. But I want it to benefit everybody, learning disability or not. That is the goal. I want the labels need to be bigger, and the information needs to be a lot bigger for people like us to see it.
Thanks very much, Sean. And certainly your point about it being beneficial for people with learning disabilities, without learning disabilities, I think is exactly the same with a project which you've been working on with Ben as well, because it's going to benefit people with learning disabilities who can finally see themselves in the curriculum, but also people without learning disabilities whose experiences and sort of ways of seeing the world have been widened through the work that yourself and Ben have done. So thank you very much for your contribution, Sean. And then finally,
and one more thing, if you don't mind.
Of course you can. Of course you can.
Sorry, I'm not being rude.
No, you're not being rude at all.
Like I was talking to Ben other day, and I said to Ben, I would like to talk to children with learning disability, without learning disability, about people with learning disability life, how people like us live. We are living history now. And myself, I live in history. Like in the past, I worked in jobs I didn't like, but I'm working a job I do right now. But I'm always living the history, and I'm married. I got kids. I got a proper career, and I got MBA. But children with learning disability and children without learning disability, it can get inspired by adults like us who got learning disability and talk about our personal history in schools and colleges, because we want to break down barriers and make history important. No more whitewashing. We want that to change.
Thanks very much, Sean. In fact, I'm going to give you a little sound effect for that. Thanks very much, Sean, for that. And yeah, thank you so much for your contributions today. And finally, I'm going to just one final question for Ben, which isn't actually related to what we've discussed today, but it's something I know you've blogged about before, and I might be catching you by surprise here. Could you offer us some quick thoughts, please, on the government's plans to extend the school day, either with a compulsory extra half an hour or an optional 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.?
Yeah, of course. I have blogged about this quite a lot. The thing is, it doesn't look like a bad idea on the face of it, does it? I mean, if you're not a teacher, if you don't work in education, if you're a politician who doesn't understand how it works very much, half an hour extra a day, you think, oh, well, the teachers will probably not like it, but they'll get used to it. and our kids could then catch up. But the problem is, as soon as you start trying to work this into a plan, you just run into problems everywhere you go. I haven't got time to go through all of them now, but I mean, just take first of all the fact that schools are already operating an extended day. Name me a school that starts teaching at 9 o'clock and finishes at 3. It doesn't happen. The schools already have interventions, targeted work so kids don't miss curriculum, sports clubs, reading clubs, breakfast clubs for kids who don't get breakfast, societies. All of these things already happen. Now, if you are going to put an extra half an hour on at the end of the day, or start school half an hour earlier, it isn't really practical to push those other activities another half an hour on and still have them. So you are actually losing. And the other thing I'd say here is about the attainment gap. Now, often the time before and after school is used by schools to target the pupils who need help the most, the pupils who need extra phonics work or read, write, ink, or extra work to catch up on aspects of the curriculum. So what do you do if you're making all the kids stay behind for that half an hour? Does that mean that everybody is getting that? In which case, well, the attainment gap is going to grow as well. And lastly, just a really practical thing that I think people don't think about unless you've run a school. It gets dark at winter. Like if you're going to say we're going to go half an hour after school, well, that's quite a lot of time for a kid. It's then going to get dark. You're going to have parents in some classes saying we don't want our kids to stay after school. Others will say it's fine. And it all becomes this sort of really, really messy thing. It just doesn't work very well when you try and turn this idea into a plan. I mean, I would say schools are already doing pretty well at making good decisions about what to use their extra time for, and that trying to command that from the top would do far more harm than good.
Thank you, Ben. Very clear. And certainly, I'm sure you're absolutely knackered after what's been a very, very long half term. I know I am as well. So thanks so much for giving up your time. And of course, a big thank you to Sean as well. I'm going to give you a nice little round of applause as well. Thank you so much for coming on. Goes on for a while.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Ben. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And I'm really grateful for being able to give yourself and Sean a platform to raise these really important projects. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you, and take care. Thank you for asking us.
No problem. Before we take a quick ad break, I ought to remind you of an opportunity to everybody listening live to win a mug, a Teachers Talk Radio mug, by answering the following quiz question. All you have to do is call in with the correct answer. And the question is, there are 8.2 million state school pupils in England. What proportion of these are eligible for free school meals? Is it A, 5%? B, 10%, C, 20%, or D, 30%. That is A, 5%, B, 10%, C, 20%, or D, 30%. And we're going to have a quick ad break now, and you've got plenty of time to think about the answer in the next 60 seconds.
Introducing Amanda Davey. Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davey-dyscalculia.co.uk. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Tom Hopkins Burke.
This is Tom Hopkins Burke with your weekend Teachers Talk Radio News. A Schools Week investigation has claimed that founding employees of Oak National Academy were in line to receive £41 million under their preferred proposal for the future of the online school. The proposal would have given Oak bosses 80% of shares into a private company before it was withdrawn, having been deemed unworkable. The document, Oak 3.0 proposal, was submitted to the Reach Foundation, which runs Oak, by Oak's principal Matthew Hood OBE. In response to Schools Week's story, Hood tweeted that he insisted that every option that included employee ownership models explicitly excluded himself from them. The National Association of Head Teachers says that more school bubbles are self-isolating amid concerns over a new variant of COVID. Paul Whiteman, General Secretary of the NAHT, said that the union was picking up more reports of schools having to close multiple classes. Earlier this week, the government announced that 4,000 pupils missed school last Thursday, having tested positive for COVID-19. Furthermore, the number of students self-isolating following potential close contact with a positive case jumped from 65,000 on the 12th of May to 88,000 on the 20th of May. A petition calling for a teacher to be reinstated following his suspension for allegedly raising health and safety concerns has reached almost 1,000 signatures. Tom Mitchell, a teacher at Taverham High School in East Anglia, was suspended earlier this month following 16 years at the school. In November 2020, he was reported to have raised concerns to the school and his union about COVID health and safety measures not being followed, including ventilation and safety within bubbles. A spokesperson from the school said that the school had followed all public health guidance. That was your weekend education news with Tom Hopkins Burke. A big thank you to myself, I suppose, for the weekend news. I wrote that late last night in an emergency because our weekend newsreader wasn't able to do it. I don't think I've ever recorded a news segment before, having been that tired and that zoomed out. But hopefully you are now up to date with the latest news. Of course, yesterday for the vast majority of state schools or academies was deadline day. Officially deadline day is the 31st of May, but yesterday was the last day before the half-term break for the vast majority of schools, and so it's the last reasonable time for a school employee to hand in their notice. Christopher Vowles, who hosts the Wednesday Late Show, probably my favourite show of all of the Teachers Talk radio shows, and I'm sure if Dave Cunningham is listening, he will agree too. He remarked to me yesterday that Teachers Talk radio needed a live ticker running on its Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn page, and of course, if you're not following us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, or LinkedIn, then please do. Christopher suggested a ticker with, like, for example, Mr. Smith is considering crossing the Pennines for a once-in-a-lifetime chance to help Anywhere High School cement their position in the top 4 of the Times League table by the end of the summer. Mrs. Jones has put in an application for a work permit to ply her trade in the Netherlands and is waiting for the green light from officials. Mr. Howe turns down the chance to continue his instructional coaching career north of the border because Bournemouth has a beach. If you get the reference to the last one, then I'm sure Christopher will be very pleased. There are still vacancies in some schools, of course. Deadline day has been and gone. But I noticed at a school near me, not one which I work in, launched a plethora of vacancies this morning, which is absolutely fascinating. There's also a vacancy in my school. And if you follow, I can't advertise it here, but if you follow me on Twitter at HB_history, it is pinned to the top of my profile. If you've ever wanted to work with me, then that is your chance. We're going to move on to our next story now, which I was going to do solo, a bit of a monologue, but I'm absolutely delighted to have a caller whose work I have read very carefully and has been, been totally indebted to Julie and of course Andy Jolly for their work on this story, because I'm not a journalist, I'm a teacher who does this one day a week hosting on Teachers Talk Radio. I don't have time to go and do my own investigation, so I have relied so much on the work of others for some of the stories that we have covered. I'm just going to unmute Julie and see if we can hear from her now. Hi Julie.
Hi Tom, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. This was very impromptu, I think. Very quick. Could you just quickly introduce yourself, please, to our listeners?
Yes, gladly. I'm Julie Cordiner, and I've been an accountant in local government since 1980, blah, blah, blah. And I've worked in education all my career since then. But in 2015, I went freelance because I wanted to go back to my finance roots. I was an assistant director in a local authority at the time, and I just wanted to go back to finance. So I set up School Financial Success with the aim, it's a website and blog and newsletter and everything, and write books, because I was very conscious that teachers go through the careers without any instruction in finance, and then on the day they get the first headship, somebody hands them several £1 million and tells them to get on with it, and there's not really, much in the way of good advice all sort of in one place. So that's been my mission since then, to try and help. But I do like to pick up issues that are important, and I live in the northeast in Hartlepool. They're playing a crucial football match today, so we'll see if they get into the playoffs to get back into the league. So in the northeast, with high deprivation all around it, pupil premium is a very important issue to me.
Thank you very much, because today we were going to talk about, first of all, I'm just looking to see what is happening in those conference playoffs. I can see that Notts County, because I'm seeing him losing 1-0 at Bromley, my word, that won't go down well. But no, I thought, first of all, because you're the expert on this, I thought, why don't you win a Teachers Talk Radio mug? So my quiz question was, there are 8.2 million state school pupils in England. What proportion of these are eligible for free school meals? I should point out, I did get the answer from your blog. Is it A, 5%, B, 10%, C, 20%, or D, 30%?
It's around 20%.
It is around 20%. It is around 20%. Congratulations. It's about 1.63 million now out of 8.2 million. So 20% is the best estimate. So at the end of the show, please do go on to our website, ttradio.org, and fill out the contact form with details that you won your mug on the Saturday Lunch Show with Tom Hopkins Burke, and give them, please, a postal address. And a mug will arrive to your doorstep in 14 to 21 days. So congratulations. Just first of all, then, because again, you can explain this much better than me. What is pupil premium funding?
It's an extra funding stream above the normal budget share, or whatever you want to call your annual grant, and it's very much targeted at pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds. It's based on an indicator called Ever 6 free school meals. So rather than just the snapshot that an annual census gives you, they count in any of the censuses of the last 6 years, so that's 18 censuses all told. And if a pupil on your roll at the count date has been eligible at any point in those 6 years, then you get the money for it. And it's now about I think it's £1,345 per primary pupil, and it was £955 for secondary. It's just gone off the top of my head. I can't remember whether that's still the case for secondary schools. So this is not insignificant money, and you are supposed to focus on those pupils in spending that money. You can have a little bit of leakage if you're doing some activities that include those pupils and also a few others, but broadly speaking, you are supposed to have a policy around how you're spending that. Put details of that on your website is a requirement, and you Ofsted will have a focus on how those pupils are doing. So if you're not spending money on those children and they're not achieving the progress they need to, then somebody should be asking questions about that.
Brilliant, thank you. I should point out from my experience of working in a school that schools do not necessarily need to spend their pupil premium funding exclusively on children eligible for free school meals or eligible for pupil premium funding, but can spend it on whole school initiatives, which they can prove and can, I hate this word as a verb, but can evidence will improve students eligible for free school meals. Now, I feel like you're going to know the answer to the next question, but on the 17th of December last year, as questions were being raised about closing schools in Greenwich a week early, arrangements for that Christmas loosening of COVID restrictions, and all sorts of other news stories, the Department for Education snuck out a change regarding pupil premium funding. Could you enlighten our listeners, please, on what this was?
Well, normally we do have to wait for the pupil premium allocations because they don't come out until June. And that's because they're based on the January census normally, up until 2021. So they have to do all the data churning and everything, and because it's going back over 6 years, the DFE does that and then presents the information and calculates the grant. But for the first time in December, the DFE announced that they weren't going to count the pupils in January, but they would go back to October 2020 census for 2021-22 grant. And this was pretty underhand, really, because, new reception children arrive, new year 7s arrive into schools in September, and schools have to do an awful lot to get parents to register for free school meals. So if there were any newly eligible, then, they don't have a very long window to get them to sign up ready for the October census, which in 2020 was actually on the 1st of October. So all the stuff that you have to do at the beginning of the school year, you can imagine this is pretty challenging. And then DFE comes and changes the goalposts in December. So schools didn't even have the notice that this was going to happen, and so they lost that opportunity. And we do know that with COVID, there are many more people out of work, many more people, on the breadline, and therefore we would expect there to be more pupils, which indeed the data the government eventually published did show there was an increase in eligibility up to October. But the missing piece of information is how much more it would have gone up if it had been left at the January count date.
Brilliant. Thank you. And certainly looking at the statistics, 1.44 million pupils in last January 2020, before COVID hit, were registered to receive free school meals. The figure now, it's gone up by about 200,000. Now, Andy Jolly, who I did invite onto the show, but unfortunately didn't get back to me, says it's hard to see this as anything other than a cost-cutting exercise. Now, on Teachers Talk Radio, we are supposed, and we do offer a variety of viewpoints. So, I mean, if anybody does want to call in and say, and answer a question, yes to, should we withhold money from children in poverty, then please do, because I would love to hear from you. If you do have, of course, strong views on this issue, please do call in, please do text in, please do tweet us at TT Radio 2021, and also at me personally at HB_history. You can certainly argue, perhaps, I'm very much playing devil's advocate here. I certainly think that this is a pretty, it's pretty underhand move. You can argue that the extra spending by the government on laptops and IT has mainly ended up with pupils eligible for free school meals, and that could justify this. If anybody does want to defend that policy change along those lines, please do call in and let me know. I'm just going to go through some comments on Twitter which I've seen about this. I'm going to start with Simon Smith, who's a head teacher on Twitter at SmithSMM, who said that this was a cynical change in the funding and that these children will now not receive pupil premium funding to support with their learning for almost 18 months whilst they are eligible. This was quietly pushed out on the 17th of December. Not surprised, just angry. And he continued that if each school had 10 new sign-ups between November and December, as his school had, the government would save £325 million. Simon tweeted that on the 23rd of January. It's 2 hours shame, really. I mean, we started on Teachers Talk Radio after the 23rd of January, but even so, it's taken us quite a while to get this story onto the airwaves. And that, I suppose, is 2 hours shame, because it's a vital story. It involves some of the most vulnerable students in the country. It's a vital topic. It does deserve to gain traction. Is there a particular regional, because you've spoken about being from Hartlepool, living in Hartlepool, is there a particular regional divide in terms of where the money is being lost, as far as you're aware, Julie?
I mean, within each area, obviously, there's a mix of schools. Even in Hartlepool, you get a difference, but there's no doubt about it that this will hit the schools with the highest levels of free school meal eligibility the hardest. So, and that will happen up and down the country. I mean, Andy did an immense job getting freedom of information responses, but they didn't get a complete set. So we've sort of tried to project what the missing ones might look like by grouping them into sort of levels of deprivation. But yes, it will hit the northeast particularly hard. It'll hit some of the city areas, the conurbations and so on. And for me, it just continues the trend that I've noticed of this government pushing more and more money on ordinary pure pupil numbers, which will benefit those in more affluent areas. And I do think that we've got problems at both ends of the scale, because the people who don't have significant extra funding for deprivation struggle because the basic funding is not adequate either. It's just that the government won't do a bottom-up model to build it from the baseline of what an average school with average pupils should get. And so, nobody's been able to say what the gap should be and how much extra funding should be given for deprivation. But this is a case where they are providing and shouting about providing COVID catch-up fund and COVID recovery premium and everything. But they're not really giving that much because they're taking it away with the other hand. So it's pretty appalling, really.
Thank you. There are still some people listening into our studio live. If you're listening back later, I've got a little task for you to do here. I'm going to read out some local authorities, and if you're listening live, I want you to text into the studio if I list your local authority and how that local authority is going to be affected. If you're listening later on demand via our website or via Spotify or via Apple Podcasts, then go to @TT Radio2021 and tweet us if I say the name of your local authority and how it's going to be affected. North Yorkshire County Council, and this is all thanks to Julie and Andy, who have done the Freedom of Information, blogged about this. North Yorkshire County Council said it was set to lose an estimated £862,000 based on an increase of 687 pupils eligible for free school meals between October and December. For Wakefield Council, 636 pupils became eligible, and it estimates it would lose £800,000. Islington Council, more than £487,000. Staffordshire, Gavin Williamson's constituency, is in there. Potential loss of £1.3 million. Hillingdon, Boris Johnson's constituency, is in there. Up to £625,000. Kent, £4 million. Birmingham, almost £3.8 million. Northumberland, £2.5 million. Cheshire and West Cheshire, £1.4 million. Derbyshire, £1.4 million. Greater Manchester, £10 million in funding could be lost. This is big money. And Nicola, who does a lot of our streaming for Teachers Talk Radio, has said that she's in Birmingham. So thank you very much for that. And Julian Harnden, funding specialist at the ASCL, the Association of School and College Leaders, told TES that the timing of the government's administrative change to pupil premium funding is extremely unfortunate, to say the least, and is going to have a severe impact on schools. The logic behind bringing the pupil premium into line with most other school funding is good, but the decision to proceed with it during the most disruptive period education has seen for more than 75 years is difficult to fathom. Funding, or more precisely the lack of it, is a distraction that schools do not need as they seek to reset the education agenda after an unprecedented year of disruption. Waiting a further 12 months to access the pupil premium for even a small percentage of their pupils will hit them hard and leave them out of pocket at a critical time. The government needs to address this issue now and provide funding to cover the increase in eligible pupils between October and January. Nicola's also texted in to say £8 million is shocking. Yes, again, I can't, I don't think you can defend the indefensible. If somebody does want to come and defend this, then please do call in. Pupil premium funding is absolutely vital. Schools Week estimates that in total, schools across the country will be £125 billion out of pocket, based on this figure of an estimated 102,000 extra children who would have become eligible between the two census dates. The National Association of Head Teachers has indicated that nearly 62% of schools have at least 5 pupils who have become eligible for pupil premium funding between October and January. I should point out what the government has said. Nick Gibb says that individual schools would not lose out as a direct consequence of the change, and that a typical school will see their pupil premium increase from last year to this year. Julie, your thoughts on that, please? I see it created quite the reaction.
Honestly, I mean, he's got a line to peddle, hasn't he? But, even anybody with a basic grasp of maths can see that if you just look at January to October 2020, yes, that's an increase, but it's not as big an increase as you would have had if it had gone through to January. It's just ridiculous. They know full well that this is to make savings because the Treasury didn't give them enough to provide the extra COVID support, so they've had to claw it back from somewhere. But why claw it back from the very people who need it the most? And essentially they know full well that schools will do their level best to help these children, so they will continue to give the support. But there's a knock-on effect. You can't do everything. You don't have the money to do everything. It's just taking advantage of schools' passion and commitment and vision to do the best for their pupils. And meanwhile, the government sitting back and presenting all this largesse, but knowing full well that they're cheating by taking with the other hand. It's terrible.
Here's another quote, and again, this was mentioned on your blog, so it's not entirely new, but it's from Government Minister Vicky Ford, and I think you know what we're going to say. She said about this changes to the pupil premium funding, it won't actually make a huge difference. What we've done is to give schools more certainty for the year ahead. If you base it on the January census, they have got very short notice. Your thoughts on that, please?
Well, who's providing the data? Schools are, so of course they know what the data says. They know which pupils are eligible. They've got the evidence. So with it being a 6-year thing, all they need to look at is the starters and leavers, and it's very easy to predict, really. So that's just completely untrue. I think these people, they have to make comments, but they don't actually understand the background to it. They don't really know the facts, so they just seem to make it up on the spot. But to say it won't make a huge difference. Well, Andy and I have, and many others have proved that actually it will make a very big difference to schools, and those pupils, they won't suffer because the schools will do their very best, but it's just not on.
Thanks very much, Julie, and a real pleasure to hear from you on this topic. Much more interesting having you on compared to me just doing a monologue on this. And again, much of the information I have in front of me here is based on the work that yourself and Andy Jolly have done. So thanks so much for calling in, Julie Cordiner.
No worries. Thanks.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Just over 5 minutes to go then on today's Saturday lunch. As you will have heard earlier, we've been absolutely thrilled to have our first advertising on our airwaves this week. If you would like to advertise with us, go to ttradio.org/advertise to find out more. Our rates are very reasonable considering that we have reached 10,000 unique listeners on Podbean Live, 80,000 podcast downloads and counting. And we've also reached our 200th subscriber on the website yesterday. There are plenty of opportunities to still get involved in Teachers Talk Radio. We have vacancies on our live streaming team headed up by Nicola Arkenstall. I think she may still well be in here. Feel free to call in, Nicola. You don't need to be a host to be a part of this. It's a great opportunity to become a part of the team. All you need to do is be around for a few hours each week to stream the show on Twitter, YouTube and Facebook, and you will receive full training. I also need to point out, especially if you're listening on there already, that we are live on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and soon to be on LinkedIn as well. We have closed captioning on Facebook. We're endeavouring to make this available for all of our shows, not just yet, but we will do soon. In addition, and if a member of the executives listening and I get anything wrong here, please do correct me. There are still some opportunities left to join our hosts team. So if you think you could do a better job than me, well, first of all, you are probably right. And secondly, here's what's left on our schedule, which is filling up quite nicely. The Monday morning break, 9 till 10 a.m, and the drive home, 4 till half 5 p.m. Tuesday, we have a full schedule. More on that later. Wednesday and Thursday, we're looking for a morning break presenter, 9 till 10 a.m. On Fridays, we need a twilight show presenter from 6 till half 7 p.m. and a late show host, 10 till half 11 p.m. if you're still awake for that on a Friday, of course. If you're one of our listeners from North or South America, and I did a USA special 2 weeks ago with Jasmine Lane and with Ellen Sherritt, then that may be a more reasonable time for you to present. So that may be an opportunity you may be interested in. And I think that's it. I think we have a full house on a weekend at the moment. There's only 6 slots remaining then to host on Teachers Talk Radio. We may create some more slots, but that's not a decision I make. But we're not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. Do keep your eyes peeled. Nicola says, we would love people to join our stream team. Please DM me on @Arkinstall_Nikki if you would like to find out more. Nikki is spelled Nikki. I was going to talk about Oak National Academy. I don't have time to do that justice, so that may well be a segment which I do in a couple of weeks' time. We've had some incredible shows and some incredible hosts lined up over the next few days. Alice Arnold is back with the Saturday Late Show tonight at 8 p.m. and tomorrow we have a full schedule. Sabia Iqbal has a breakfast show. Amy Ferguson steps in for Graham Collin with Sunday Brunch. If you missed Graham, he was on just before me on the Saturday Brunch. I missed him because I was preparing for my show, so I'm definitely going to be listening back on that one. Khalil Rouse has the Sunday Lunch, and Tony Breslin is back with a late show at 8 p.m. We also have a plethora of new hosts starting in the half-term week. Scott Pewsley starts on Monday with a Twilight Show, and Femi Owolade has the Monday Late Show at 10 p.m. It's half term, it's not a work night. You can stay up for Femi, can't you? I certainly will be. We then have Tabitha McIntosh with the Tuesday Breakfast Show next week too. I imagine she'll be talking about badges amongst many other things. Hayley Hughes is on the airwaves with the Thursday Twilight Show on the 10th of June. So that's not next week or a week after. And Amanda Wilson hosts her second late show on the 3rd of June. Alfred Burke, if I got that pronunciation wrong, Alfred, I'm very sorry, is with us on Friday with a drive home. Although as we're on half term, I hope nobody is driving home. We also have a Sunday Twilight Show host next week. I'm not sure if she has already entered the room. If you want to call in and share the news, that's absolutely fantastic. That means we have, I think, 5 debutants next week, and then another 2 the week after. Something like that, which means we are going from strength to strength with Teachers Talk Radio. As it's half term, I hope you are free to listen in live, text in, call in. Generally speaking, give them your full support. I will be live tweeting from the @TT Radio 2021 account from each of the debut shows next week, and hopefully a few more on top of that too. Next week, I have a panel of 5 secondary trainee teachers. Fantastic. Fiona Salt is here and she starts on the 6th of June. Really, really looking forward to Fiona Salt with the Sunday Twilight Show. Next week, I have a panel of 5 secondary trainee teachers. If you want to ask them any questions about training to teach during a global pandemic, please pass on your questions via Twitter to @TT Radio 2021 or to me personally @HB_history. More on that later. The following Saturday, I am joined by sociology and criminology teacher Lawrence Pryor, who has the joy and the fortune of working with me in the same faculty. We'll be talking about the merits of the EPQ, or the Extended Project Qualification, and we'll also be talking about our favourite chocolate biscuit bars as a way of improving staff well-being. Last half term, distracting everybody in the staff room from tags. You don't want to miss that. And until next time, tune in and talk it out.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.